October 14, 3:17 a.m. The vault alarm remained silent. Not a single laser grid tripped. Not one pressure plate registered the absence. But $300 million in physical gold bars, stacked for decades in the subterranean heart of the city, was gone. How do you steal something that heavy, that tangible, without touching it? Because the key to this impossible theft wasn't a cutting torch or a master safecracker. It was a few lines of flawlessly executed code. This wasn't a robbery, it was an erasure. A digital ghost slipping through the concrete and steel, leaving behind only the cold, hard implication. The real gold standard is no longer metal, but data. The initial reports mentioned a power surge, a blip in the regional grid that lasted precisely 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Security personnel dismissed it as routine infrastructure instability, the usual cost of doing business in a metropolis that never truly sleeps. But that blip was the cover. It was the digital curtain rising on a performance engineered months, perhaps years, in advance. The question echoing in the sterile underground chambers was terrifyingly simple. If the physical assets are still accounted for on paper, where exactly did they go? It starts not in the vault, but in the quiet hum of a server room, miles away, in a nondescript office park where the air conditioning struggles perpetually against the heat generated by ambition. Here, anonymity is currency. The architect of this operation, we'll call them the curator, understood a fundamental truth about modern finance. Physical wealth is merely a promise authenticated by digital ledger. If you control the promise, the physical location becomes almost irrelevant. The curator didn't need to crack the vault's steel door. They needed to convince the vault's nervous system it hadn't been breached. This required infiltration, not of the building, but of the protocols governing its existence. Think of the vault's security system not as a wall, but as a complex, layered language spoken only by authorized machines. To enter, you had to become fluent. The first breach was subtle, almost invisible. It involved a third-party contractor, a small, specialized firm tasked with updating the environmental controls, the humidity gauges, the temperature logs, the archaic fire suppression system. A perfect vector. A single, seemingly innocuous firmware update, pushed remotely, contained a parasitic module, a seed planted deep within the very operational code that governed the movement logs. The sound of a cooling fan whirring slightly too fast. A faint, almost inaudible click of an access relay being permanently bypassed. That was the first stage complete. Then came the waiting. Weeks passed where the system functioned perfectly, reporting ideal conditions, logging standard inventory checks. The curator was mapping the network topography, identifying the choke points where the physical inventory data intersected with the high-level transfer authorization matrix. The stakes weren't just the gold, the stakes were the reputation of the institution that swore that gold was untouchable. Every single transaction, every movement, every audit was being monitored by an unseen observer. The critical weakness wasn't the encryption was state-of-the-art. The weakness was human complacency built into the fail-safe procedures. Audits required dual authorization, a physical keycard scan and a biometric confirmation, followed by a manual server override confirmation from an off-site manager. The curator didn't try to spoof the keycard or clone the fingerprint. That's amateur work. They targeted the confirmation layer. Imagine the manager's terminal late one Tuesday night, bathed in the pale glow of a triple monitor setup. A highly specific, timed malware payload is deployed, triggered by a specific external event, the scheduled, minor grid fluctuation that occurs every 3 months to test capacitor integrity. When the lights briefly dimmed across the district, the malware executed. It didn't steal passwords, it hijacked the input stream itself. For those 4 minutes and 22 seconds of the recorded power anomaly, the manager's system believed it was receiving legitimate input sequences for a high-value asset transfer request. The biometric sensor registered a perfect match because the malware was feeding the system the stored template data directly, bypassing the actual scan. The keycard reader registered a valid swipe because the system was fed the required hexadecimal sequence. The manager, sipping lukewarm coffee, saw only a successful, green-lit confirmation prompt flashing across their screen, a prompt designed to look exactly like the system reboot confirmation following a temporary power dip. But the gold hadn't physically moved. Not yet. This was the crucial pivot in the architecture of the crime. The curator wasn't stealing the bars, they were digitally liquidating them, transforming physical weight into untraceable, ephemeral currency. The narrative shifts now, not to the vault but to the international commodity markets. The system was programmed to execute a rapid-fire series of trades. The liquidated value of the gold was instantly converted into several layers of privacy-focused cryptocurrencies, routed through a series of interconnected, decentralized exchanges across 3 continents, and finally fragmented into millions of microtransactions directed toward burner wallets. The speed was terrifying. The entire conversion and dispersal took less than 90 seconds from the moment the false authorization was logged. By the time the main power grid stabilized and the vault's internal systems performed their mandatory integrity check 5 minutes later, the digital footprint of the gold was already scattered across the dark corners of the global financial net. When the analysts finally reviewed the logs the next morning, they saw a perfectly authorized, fully compliant transfer of ownership. The digital ledger showed the gold was now owned by shell corporations registered in jurisdictions known for their impenetrable banking secrecy. Physical inspectors were dispatched immediately. They descended into the cold, quiet depths, flashlights cutting through the dark. And there it was, row upon row of gleaming heavy bars, exactly where they should be. The weight felt right. The assay marks matched. This is the core mystery the investigators faced. The inventory was physically present, yet the ownership, the legal transactional reality of that inventory, was utterly vanished. The bars were ghosts, tethered to phantom paperwork. The curator had executed the perfect mirror heist: steal the metadata, leave the object. The actual gold was still sitting there, a magnificent heavy decoy, while its monetary value had been spirited away. The brilliance of the scheme lay in exploiting the trust embedded in the system. In a world obsessed with cybersecurity, the assumption is that the physical security is the ultimate backstop. If you can't get in, you can't steal the contents. The curator proved that in the digital age, the backstop is merely another layer of software waiting to be convinced. They didn't need to breach the vault's perimeter. They breached its definition of reality. The investigation spun into a vortex of digital forensics, chasing echoes across servers that were already wiped clean, tracking tokens that dissolved into untraceable liquidity pools. The only remaining evidence was the infinitesimal digital disturbance left behind during that 4-minute window, the single moment when the system believed a lie so completely that it rewrote centuries of economic trust. The gold sits in the vault still, a monument to this new era of invisible theft, forever tainted by the knowledge that its physical existence means nothing if its digital signature belongs to someone else. The gold standard, they now realize, is just a story we tell ourselves, and sometimes the storyteller is the thief.